Chapter 12. The Foundations of the Future. The king was in Canterbury. It was the seventh spring from the day of the queen's promise. For even 7 years will pass. Wolf was sent for. I have been reminded of what I owe, the king told him. Here is the title to the land we have promised you may call your own. Take it, boy, and may you prosper. May the king prosper, cried Wolf. He went on one knee and took the roll. May God bless and keep your lordship always. Amen to that. Now be off with you. And since every man must needs get to his spring planting, the queen has released you from the last months of the vow. You may claim the girl tomorrow. Wolf stammered something, but the king had already turned to other matters, and he knew himself dismissed. The land the king had given Wolf and Fritha was outside the city and along the river, not too far from the great new monastery and church that were being built, which would be dedicated to St. Peter and St. Paul. For about the monastery and the monastery lands, Wolf's work would always lie. Nowadays, though Wulfstan gave the orders, Wolf saw them carried out. Increasingly, there was church property to be administered, farms and villages, granaries and herds, dovecots and stew ponds, and the sea fishery which provided winter fare for the monks and the poor they fed in great numbers. And if they had not thrust on as far westward into the forest as had once seemed likely, they knew the time would come. If they had learned nothing else in these years, Augustine's men had learned patience. They had been busy, too, all this time. When the Pope elevated Abbot Augustine to become the first Archbishop of Canterbury, he sent a blessing. All the bishops in Britain we commit to your care. And a year later, the Holy Father sent to England many wise and learned brethren to assist in the great work of converting the country. Mellitus came, and Paulinus and Laurentius, and Justus and Rufinus. What had been a small, struggling mission based on a modest community became now a church established and growing hourly. In the years that followed the conversion of King Ethelbert, Augustine's work prospered. Hundreds were baptized. The old gods were thrown down. Young men came to devote themselves to the religious life. Already some of these were nearing their final vows. Much had been accomplished, but the archbishop was no longer a young man, and he had been in poor health for many months. As Wolf left the king's apartment, his head full of thoughts of the future, the gatehouse porter, Brother Hugh, called to him. I have been looking for you. There has been a fellow asking to speak to you. I sent him to your house to wait. Who was it, brother? What was his business? He did not say. I never saw him before. Wolf swallowed his irritation. He wanted only to go straight in search of Fritha, and now this matter must be dealt with. Very well, I will go and speak to him. He's probably from the coast. We are to build more fishing boats. Outside his own door, Wolf saw a young man standing. He was tall, heavily built, with black hair, at once familiar and unknown. As Wolf approached, the stranger turned. Wolf? Yes. Then his hand clenched into fists of rage and fear. The man was Uthra. Well, said Wolf at last, you are here, and your father, long dead. Why have you come back? Where is Fritha? Where you cannot touch her. Uthra cried out. Not dead. Dead to you. She is my promised wife. Her father Syneac gave her to me with his dying breath. The archbishop himself consents and will marry us, and the king has given us land, and the queen has cared for Fritha, who is mine and no other man's. Uthra laughed. Wolf looked at him sharply and curiously. The laughter was not as he would have expected, taunting and harsh. It was quite gentle, almost teasing. Uthra had changed. His face was not the black-browed, loutish face that Wolf remembered. It was firm, open, curiously gentle. Uthra, what do you want from me? I want your hand in friendship, Wolf. Do not think of me as my father's son. That night we sailed away, a storm upset our boat. Hardra was killed, and I was picked senseless from the waves by fishermen. I was half dead, and they left me with the monks nearby. There have been these many years. He paused, and Wolf waited, frowning now. If Uthra was a Christian, might his earlier betrothal to Fritha hold firm in the eyes of the law? Wolf, I am your friend, and ask only that you should be mine. From tomorrow my life is to change. From tomorrow? Tomorrow I enter the Order of St. Benedict here in Canterbury. Meet me 24 hours from now, and you will meet a novice. A great gush of relief made Wolf grab Uthra by both hands. Never had he felt such brotherly warmth toward any man as he felt then. It was a very human, a very secular warmth. He realized a little guiltily, but he would surely be forgiven for feeling happier that Uthra was relinquishing Fritha than that he was relinquishing his life in the world for one of dedication to God. At last Wolf was free to hurry to the Queen's Tower, where she and her ladies had their rooms. And he went, he was filled with nervousness. Tomorrow he would fetch Fritha, and she would never return to the queen's household. But suppose she had had some change of heart which had not yet admitted? What if the 7 long years had turned the thoughts of his promised bride toward a different future? The queen had by now founded her sisterhood, and the convent was filling with women eager for the religious life. What if on this very day of all days and time, another new novice should take a vow very different from the one Wolf had in mind for her? He wiped the palms of his hands against his sides. He fingered the parchment deed that meant his future was assured, but he would never make his house for any other woman, and if he should be thwarted of his choice now, he would live and die alone. He looked about him for the porter or a guard, but the courtyard was deserted. Then he heard singing. It came from the queen's little chapel that she had lately built close to her own apartments. Wolf moved toward the chapel apprehensively. The sound of women's voices singing in unison played on his imagination. Until a few seconds ago, it had not occurred to him that he might still lose what he had desired so long. But now suddenly it seemed far more likely that he would lose than gain. When the queen laid down the hard condition of a 7 year period of waiting, he thought in his panic she must have known she was likely to prevail. He stood by the chapel door, and as he was afraid to go inside. Now he could hear that there must be many of the sisterhood celebrating together. What if they were already receiving the novice, cutting off her hair, laying the long fair locks on a silver platter to be set aside as an offering upon the altar? If it was so, it would be of her own choice. He knew that, for she was not one to be prevailed upon or persuaded against her will. If after all she had rejected him without warning, if he was to be alone, he pulled open the door and slid into the dark chapel. The sun had been bright outside, and at first he could not see even the starry pattern of the lighted candles or the glow of the great tapestry he knew lay stretched across the altar. He could feel without seeing that the chapel was full. Then gradually, as though some small particular dawn were breaking, the place took shape before him. He saw that he had what he had expected to see: the queen, her ladies and waiting women, the black-clad nuns, the officiating priest, the kneeling girl, the hair at that very moment being sheared. Wolf started forward as though he must shout in protest, whether it was sacrilege or not. But a hand slid over his mouth. He was pulled backward from the aisle and almost fell. He snatched at the hands muffling him. They were small and soft. A well-known voice spoke in his ear. It is Ethswitha, the queen's second daughter, taking her first vows. Faint with relief, he fell on his knees, and Fritha knelt beside him, now holding both hands and whispering in reassurance. What did you think? That it was you. I made my first promises long ago. Have you forgotten? It was in the dark church of St. Martin on the day I was baptized. 7 years of novitiate, Wolf. Now there is only the final vow to take. They stayed side by side in the shadows at the back of the chapel as the ceremony proceeded to its end. Then the nuns took their new sister in their midst, and singing joyously, they moved in procession through the chapel, carrying her away. Come with me, Wolf whispered. We are released from the last months. We may be wed tomorrow. The king has given me the deed, and the land is mine. Come with me and see the place. Fritha looked over her shoulder nervously. Now, if I come with you alone, someone may see us. This was the new Fritha speaking, the girl who, after these years among gentle people herself, spoke softly and moved smoothly. Yet somewhere hidden in all this was still a sturdy country girl who would work beside him in the fields, if need be, and there was the child he had seized by the wrist and taken prisoner years ago on the seashore. That was the Fritha who'd crept out often enough during the past years, wearing the rough clothes she had been accustomed to until her father died, passing easily for anyone's servant girl, not one who waited on the queen. Muffle your face, Fritha, and come. The place is not wholly mine till we have been to it together. Wait in the street, then. Outside the sun was still shining. He waited a long while in the street. Now it was nearly noon. There were few people about. Either they were pausing for the midday office in which lay folk were encouraged to join, or they were seeking shade for a few minutes' rest from the labor, or they were calling for food. Presently, she came through the gateway and walked toward Wolf. Fritha had an old hood pulled low on her forehead, and she had smeared her face with dust. Wolf laughed and caught her hand and rushed her away from prying eyes. It did not take them long to reach the place. This is it, Wolf said. First we must live in the hut. It was here waiting for us. My father and I have mended the roof and made it sound. Later we will build ourselves a home. As I grow older, I shall become more skilled, and as the church lands increase, so too, God willing, will my work, and its reward. Look, Fritha, here is where our children will be born and grow. Here is where you and I may die. She said nothing. She took stood looking about her. She looked at the river and at the fertile meadow and at the building on the far bank rising up nobly against the sky. She walked about the plot where the hut stood that would shelter them for a time. It was built into an angle of stone so that two walls were solid and two of timber. She looked at this and frowned. There were others here before us then. Look, Wolf, this stone wall is a wall. This stone is a wall. She went down on her knees and began plucking at the grass round the base of the wall. A carpet of grass and roots and earth peeled back as she tugged it, revealing flat stone beneath a floor, colored tiles decorated with the familiar pattern of vine leaf and running animals. Wolf stood beside the kneeling girl and stared down at the floor. His imagination seethed with pictures. Rome, his other home, the house of the rich and powerful where he had no place, and their ruined counterparts he had so often seen in the broken places of Canterbury. He thought of his sister Anna and the news of her that had come with the last letters sent to the Archbishop from Rome. How she was married a year ago, not to Toulouse, but to his younger brother, and already had a son of her own. And standing here in England with a girl of the country upon stones laid by Roman hands, it was as though the different threads of his life were suddenly bound tightly together and knotted for all time. We can build on these foundations, Fritha. The Romans have given me a home again. He frowned and wondered. Were they Christians, or did they worship the old gods? We shall never know. The Archbishop himself will bless this place for us, Wolf, for it will remind him, too, of home. Then she shook her head. If he is well enough, if he is ever well enough. Of course he will be well, Wolf spoke roughly, because he did not dare contemplate what was already being spoken, that the Archbishop would never live to see the completion of the monastery and the new church. Fritha said, His voice is too quiet, Wolf. And this was the severest evidence she could offer of his declining strength, for his great harsh voice had been the trumpet call by which they had all fought and struggled and triumphed. Fritha's hands were covered with earth and torn grass. The whiteness they had acquired in the Queen's service was quite hidden, and she held them out and cried in dismay. But Wolf said, That is how I like them, strong and honest. Fritha laughed. She scrambled to her feet. But they must be clean tomorrow. I'm going back now, Wolf, or I shall be missed. Before he could protest or so much as touch her hand, she had started to run away over the grass that was already theirs, back to the city and the Queen's dwelling, from which next day he would go fetch her. She paused at last and turned back to wave and call to him, Tomorrow, tomorrow, let it come soon. Alone he pulled the mat of grass back over the paving. It was his, and he wanted no prying eyes to covet it. He went slowly back and sought out Brother Adrian in the priory kitchens, where there was some tallying and calculating to be done before next week's market. With Brother Adrian were Brother Lucius and one of the young English monks, Brother Britwald. The Archbishop was taken ill just after noon, Brother Adrian told Wolf. Seriously ill? He does not speak, they say. He is hard pressed to breathe. Brother Lucius gave Wolf a rather wry smile. Now the saints help us, who will make Wolf and Fritha man and wife. I fear the ceremony cannot take place, said Brother Britwald. Ah, well, said Brother Adrian, maybe Wolf will change his mind now and become one of us after all. Wolf flushed. He knew they were teasing him, as they so often did. He was the odd man out among all these religious, and they never let him forget it. Even now, with the bad news of the Archbishop's health, they could not resist the joke. I will give you my fourth son, Wolf said. Then he laughed at their faces lit up. No, it's not a solemn vow, brothers. Who knows? I may have none but daughters. A poor lookout for a man with 2 fields, 3 cows, and a sow, and a dozen geese. As they laughed quietly together, gently and easily, as they had laughed often in the past, there was the sound of running feet, sandals slapping on stone, a man panting and muttering as he hurried by. For a second, the 4 of them were there in the kitchen, stood frozen, their faces turned toward the door, their voices stilled by the dreadful urgency of that hurrying. Then, before they could recover and cry out in dismay, they heard the great thunder of the bronze bell in the north tower. Once it boomed, and again, then again, again. Slow, ponderous, spelling out a message too heavy to be quickly given. Then under and below the big bell's clamor came the quick ringing of the little summoning bell in the cloister. From all over the building the monks came hurrying, wringing their hands and weeping. There was no doubt how the summons must be interpreted. Outside, in the streets, in the city, and the countryside, men paused at the sound of the bell. They began to move at once toward the great gates of the priory. Women and children ran from the house and joined the men, and the crowd increased moment by moment, surging toward the gates. They knew the truth. They heard it in the bell's great mournful thunder. They came not to hope but to mourn. They had lost the man who had changed their lives and all their future and the future of their land, who had torn down their idols, rebuilt the ruined churches and temples, and consecrated them afresh in the name of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, who had brought consolation and content to the people and guided them in many practical ways. As suddenly as he had come, he was gone. One day it seemed he had stepped onto their shore, a stranger, whose words they could not understand. The next he was gone, and they must do without him. Their hearts told them that their heads might have rejected, that they could not hope to see his like again. A stern man, who had never offered any one of them less still himself an easy way. God rest his saintly soul, said Brother Adrian. Come to the chapel, brothers. There will be much to do. The three monks moved away silently, one after the other, leaving Wolf standing alone. An intense isolation touched him then. For all his friendship with them, his living close to the community all these years, at a moment of crisis he was nothing. They turned inward toward one another in a sympathy he could not know, with a closeness he would never understand. For a second he longed to cry after them, to call that he would be one of them after all, that he might share the intensity of their experience and the depths of their prayers. He heard his father's voice. Wolf, I am here. He is dead, said Wulfstan. I know it. Ah, you are young. You have your life. You have Fritha. But I have lost much in losing him. It was to come with him to England that I was given my freedom. How poorly I have paid my debt. No, father, no. You have done nobly. None could do more. But what will happen now? God knows, said Wulfstan sadly and gently. God knows. The whole world must miss him. He leaves us at time of trouble, but the future will be built on his work. Wolf smiled a little. He seemed to see the foundations Augustine had laid, and they were a little like the good solid pavement on which he and Fritha would build their enduring home. Hi, guys. So, in this final chapter, the 7 years have passed that Wolf was to wait for Fritha, and the queen was going to take care of her. And he starts getting a little nervous that maybe she's going to join and be a nun, but she doesn't, and he goes to pick her up, and the king gives him a piece of land where they can build a house and they can start their family, and they're supposed to be married the next day by Augustine, but Augustine is old and weak and he dies. So um, it ends kind of saying how Augustine was the one who helped them do all this work and spread the gospel and change this whole land to be Christian and to know God. And so, not that everybody was a Christian there, but they brought the gospel there and he did all that work. And they're building a new church and a new monastery. And he was the one who, came and served faithfully. So they're sad, but they're also just thankful for his life. And it kind of ends, even though he has passed away, on a happy note because Fritha and Wolf are going to get married and start their life, and Augustine's work will go on. This is based on the true Augustine of Canterbury. It talked about how he's been made Bishop of Canterbury in this book. That is his real story, that part. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this book, and thanks for, I know it was long. I know there were a lot of characters, but you guys did a great job.